Gonna run our, okay, yeah, let's start over. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm Laura Moses, a member of the executive committee. With me here is Rebecca Fanning, who's going to run the computer, and Bill Turner, who's going to give our slideshow tonight. And you probably saw on the table by the doors a sign-in sheet if you want to get on our email list. And there's also a bunch of free literature. Pick up anything you want. And now we're going to turn it over to Christine, who's going to present the PowerPoint. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you from my home. I'm happy to say I'm getting over COVID. So I didn't want to be in the space with y'all tonight, just to protect everybody. But I'm doing well and happy to be here. So on with the show. All right. Happy New Year, everybody. It's great to see everyone in the room. It's great to see everyone coming online. And yeah, it's 2024. It's amazing how fast a year goes. But last year we just had a great year with so many outings, a great oyster roast, lots of great meetings as well, and looking forward to another great year going forward. All right. So as always, it's the Robert Lunz Group of the Sierra Club, and we represent Berkeley, Charleston, Colleton, Dorchester counties, and our mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect the planet. All right, outings.
Okay.
Star, do you want to go ahead and talk about outings?
Oh, sure. So we got stuff set up for you to go see all the way through September. And it's going to start this weekend. Bill Turner's going to take you out to the Ernest F. Hollings Ace Basin National Wildlife Refuge for a 74-hour hike. That's a joke. It's just a day hike. There will be a kind of an overnight experience at the Santee Coastal Reserve. You'll have to contact me about that one. It involves camping over at the campground, which is a primitive campground. But the upside of that is that it's one of the most wonderful places to be in the early morning hours, and that's why we're doing it. A very nearby, very wonderful place is the Donnelly Wildlife Management Area, and Bill Turner's going to take you out to that one. Sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once. In March, on the 16th, wonderful bicycling trip at the Santee National Wildlife Refuge led by me. Amanda and Katie are going to teach you how to make a wire reef, oyster reef restoration project on the 22nd. On the 23rd, we'll bike the Moultrie Passage of the Palmetto Trail. And on the 27th, Bill will take you out along Wamball Creek, undoubtedly one of the most beautiful places to paddle in South Carolina. We will have some kind of a paddle on the Black River in early May in conjunction with some efforts to teach you all about something called PFAS. These are persistent chemicals that we're discovering more and more in our drinking water and in our rivers and so on. And on the 17th of May, Katie and Amanda will help you build a reef somewhere. And way out in September, we're going to go out in the woods or find out about, we'll go out in the woods and we'll find out about local mushrooms. So stay tuned. There will be more things added. Our fantastic leaders will tell you all about it. So back to you, Christine.
Thank you. And a lot of these outings are going to be in conjunction with our monthly meeting. So just like the May meeting, for example, we're going to have a meeting on the Black River and then have an outing on the Black River itself. So we encourage you to attend one or the other or both. Got it. All right, call to action. We're going to try to have a call to action every month. And this one is actually from December, and it's on the South Carolina State Sierra Club chapter website. There were 3 actions included. I just grabbed one of them and put it on this slide. And that's just talking about how we can stop burning fossil fuels in our own homes. This one in particular was Ron and Kathleen. They're members of the Sierra Club in the upstate, and they have a 10-minute PowerPoint giving you some easy steps on how to stop using your gas stove if you're interested. So if you use an electric stove, there's more of a chance that that electric stove is going to be putting out fewer greenhouse gases than your gas stove. So that's the reasoning behind this. So if you go to the South Carolina State chapter website, you'll find out more information on that. All right, it's time to vote again. In February on the 3rd, there's going to be a Democratic presidential primary. And on February 24th, there will be a Republican presidential primary. So it's not on the same day. I don't know if it's been like this in the past, but I don't remember. It just remember that depending on who you're going to vote for, you need to remember that it's a certain day of February, not the same day for both. All right. Oyster Roast is coming again, and that is always one of the most looked for events of the year. If you love oysters, if you love getting outside and being with people and just enjoying a great fall day, actually late winter, early spring, because sometimes it's warm and sometimes it's cold. We can never, every year it's different, right? So February 25th from 2 to 5 at Bowen's Island, famous Bowen's Island. If you haven't been there, you should come just to see Bowen's Island. So tickets will be $40 for oysters, which is very affordable. We've looked at tickets for other oyster roast, and we're pretty good on our price there. It also comes with homemade chili, veggie dogs, and Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Lime and the Coconuts has provided some fabulous music for our oyster roast in the past. They will be here again this year. Just cranking out the great tunes. People love dancing and having a great time to their music. So we need some volunteers. Please give us a call. Reach out to us at the Lunz Group 1970@gmail.com and let us know that, if you'd like to volunteer. We need people to scoop ice cream, serve beer, serve veggie dogs, serve chili, set up, take down. So, there's a gig for you just waiting to volunteer, and it's, an hour, you can, the rest of the time, just enjoy yourself. But please let us know. Also, we have silent auction. Laura has been working on that, and Nina as well. So we've got a lot of great items this year. And yeah, come on out and eat some oysters and bid on some auction items. Next month's program, before tonight, I'll tell you what's happening next month. We've got February 1st, again, at the Rita room that you're in right now. The Rita Holling Science Center, I think is what it is. It's the Building Better Backyards for Birds. And we're going to have Richard Hall. He's a PhD, associate professor at the University of Georgia, and a board member of the Oconee Rivers Audubon Society. So if you're interested in having more birds in your own space, in your own yard, coming out, listen to that one. He's a great speaker. All right, so tonight we've got Bill Turner in the room. He is going to be showing us fabulous slides from Nepal. Bill is one of our longtime outings leaders. He has led outings, gosh, all over South Carolina and beyond. And he knows how to travel, takes great photos. Bill, we're really looking forward to your presentation tonight. Thank you for coming, and let's get on to Bill's slides here. Oh, and thank you, everybody. While Bill's pulling up his slides, I want to let everybody know, if you're at home and you turn your screen off, your video, you will be saving energy. So while Bill is presenting, go ahead and turn that off. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat. We will get to those after Bill presents his slides.
So Rebecca, to advance this, I just click this, is that right?
Looks like it.
Okay.
Maybe back and forth work too.
Right there, okay. Well, I've had Nepal in my mind for a number of years. A guy on a Sierra Club trip.
Oh, just kidding. Mm-hmm. It helps if you make sound effects, so that's what that was. Settings, anybody? Can you see options, Laura? It was advancing by itself for sure. We didn't accidentally press a button, maybe.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I have it up on mine, and I could share it if y'all can't get it. So just to let you know that as a backfall.
Okay. That's not what I wanted. Okay, maybe that's it. I just paused the slideshow, so now you can probably automatically advance.
Okay.
That's simple. Sorry about that, everybody.
Yeah, so anybody, can everybody hear me all right? Some guy on a Sierra Club outing probably 10 years ago, very well-traveled guy, told me that Nepal was his all-time favorite trip. And that just sort of planted a seed in my mind. And I guess if you're a lifelong lover of mountains like I am, eventually you want to see the biggest, most impressive mountains in the world. So I thought one day I'd get there, but years kept going by, other things coming up. I was walking around Charlestown Landing about this time last year, and sometimes just random encounters with people can change your life in big ways. I bumped into a guy, some of you may remember, Roman Marks. Roman's a Russian immigrant from back in the 80s. I've known him for years, but I haven't seen him in a long time, several years. And we just started having this catch-up conversation. How are you? What you been up to? That sort of thing. Roman's a little bit eccentric, and out of the blue, he says, so would you like to go to Nepal? And I said, well, yeah, maybe. And he started telling me about this wonderful guide that he had had 10 years ago. Roman's about 81 now, but he did this month-long trek in Nepal and how wonderful it had been. And so I didn't have anything else planned for that year yet. So I contacted the guy, name is Babu, and he leads big multi-group outings, treks and things, but also just personal ones. And so working with Babu, I was able to come up with a personal itinerary of what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do a long trek through the Himalayas. I knew I wanted to see a couple of lowland national parks and some cultural sites. So we worked out an itinerary, had about a month to do it. And subsequently, my nephew Daniel here, 28-year-old landscape architect in Raleigh, signed up. So we flew to, now it's not advancing. Med and Sarrow here, is that right?
Don't know why.
Okay,
There
what
you
did,
go.
what did you do there?
No idea.
Okay.
Magic touch.
So are we just going to be looking at this slide the whole time? Or what? So nobody can tell me how to move this thing forward? That's what I'm doing.
Okay, now try.
What am I doing? Okay.
Click now. There you go.
Okay. So in around May 1st, we flew into Kathmandu. Kathmandu is a relatively up-to-date city. Stayed in a nice motel for the night, hotel. Few quirky things about Kathmandu, which I'll go into later. But the plan was to start this 12-day trek through the Himalayas the next day. But the outfitter said, Babu said that there was a snowstorm in the mountains, in the high mountains, and dropping a lot of snow, and recommended instead that we kind of change things around and go to one of the national parks first. This is Chitwan. It's outside of Kathmandu by maybe a 4 to 6 hour bus ride. I think we all create these stereotypical images of places we've heard about and never been. And when you think of Nepal, you think of big snowy mountains, which is all of Nepal is not like that. This is a lowland jungle, very tropical, hot. So we spent, I think, 3 days there. Nepal has an army, and one of their jobs is guarding these national parks, and they seem to do a great job. This park, Chitwan, which is about, I think, a little less than 1,000 square kilometers, has a population of 100 tigers. And that's, they've doubled or almost tripled their population of tigers in Nepal in the last decade. So that's a huge success story. So we, in Chitwan, we took a ride down this river in one of these wonderful old thin wall dugout canoes. Saw two different types of crocodiles. There was an option for an elephant safari. We didn't do that, but they do have a population of wild elephants there. And also these guys, I certainly didn't think of rhinoceroses as being in Nepal, but these are white rhinos, mother and baby, just lounging in the water. And managed to get a close-up of this guy. And just so you know, I wasn't behaving like one of those stupid Yellowstone tourists that you're always reading about. He was behind a fence, a captive in one of the check stations. But the Army patrols these parks very well. There are check stations going in and out. They patrol the park in jeeps on the roads and on elephants in the backcountry. And as a result, there is virtually no poaching of rhinos or elephants or anything else. Took a walking tour of the park, or hike, I guess. And after 3 days there, we had a fairly arduous bus ride. The roads in Nepal are just terrible. They're potholed, they're dusty. They always seem to be working on them, but they're never never seemed to finish any. But we started this trek, the Manaslu trek is what it's called. It's 12 days, as I recall, maybe 13. It's 110 miles. It's starts at 1,300 feet. No, I'm sorry, 3,700 feet, and goes up gradually over that period to just under 17,000. So most of the time you're climbing, but not dramatically climbing. And we started, and a good part of the first of the trip was hiking along this beautiful river in this gorge. Pretty hot at the start, averaging about 10 miles a day, not a grueling pace. And periodically the trail switches from one side of the river to the next. And when it does, you cross on these suspended cable bridges, which are fairly substantial. They bounce up and down when other people are on them, which is a little unnerving when you're hundreds of feet in the air, but they're fairly well done. And here you see kind of a typical village there on the left. Terraced agricultural fields running down the slopes of just subsistence farming. This was not a wilderness trip. There are these villages that are spaced along and along. Maybe on the average of every hour they come up. We always were at a village for lunch. We were always staying in what they call tea house at night. And very rudimentary basic accommodations, but not heated and not, you had to bring your own sleeping bag, but you were indoors, out of the weather at least. This was a little bit of a bittersweet trek because that scar, that horizontal scar you see on the right of the mountainside on the other side of the river is a new road being built that will connect Nepal with Tibet and China. And that road is being laid over the existing trek trail. So we kind of knew we were among the last trekkers to experience this area as it is, and as it really has been for hundreds of years. There's presently no access along connecting these villages except the trail. So the only way of supplying them in and out is these mule trains that come through on pretty regular intervals. And when they're coming up the trail, they might have 20 or 30 mules in a row. You just sort of step out of their way and let them pass. But a pretty isolated existence for a lot of the people there. And one of many incongruities about Nepal, you have these ancient villages along this ancient trade route that's now become a trekking trail, and deliveries taking place the same way they've done hundreds and hundreds of years. But yet occasionally we see the mule drivers talking on cell phones. It's sort of 21st century coming to medieval times. Most of these villages have just received electricity. You'll see electrical cables in a lot of the pictures within the last 10 years. So they've really been isolated. Here we are approaching a small village. I think we stayed at this place for a night and beginning to get a glimpse of those big monstrous mountains they were heading into eventually. When you're going from 3,700 feet to 17,000 feet, you always hate to lose any elevation, but occasionally it happens. And here we are going downhill, only having to gain it back again at the end. And there's our great guide Babu in the foreground with one of those cable bridges over the river in the background. Just a beautiful, beautiful gorge, lots of lush vegetation in the lower reaches. I think it was around here and maybe on the left that we saw just big areas of wild marijuana growing. I think these plants here are marijuana, highly illegal in Nepal, so we weren't terribly tempted to sample it. But And these are pretty common. These are called stupas. These are at the entrance of many of the little villages. They're of a religious nature. The predominant religion in Nepal is Hindu, about 90% plus or minus. The other 10% is Buddhist. From all accounts, the two religions get along quite well. There was a civil war in Nepal a few decades ago, but I think that was more of a political nature. And then there are these things also usually at the entrance to villages called manti walls. And they consist of long rows of tablets and inscriptions and stones, some old, some new, with just wonderful carvings of mantras and religious texts. A lot of them in Tibetan. Our guide could not read this, but just beautiful script and pretty unique looking, we thought. And great carvings like this. It was just fascinating to look at these manti walls and all the stones. Here entering another village, again to spend the night. And they are amazingly attentive to color. We just love their use of color. Very vibrant, rich colors. You see this is a fairly new building here, I think, but just look at that wonderful cornice work and the windows. Every time there's a change of plane, there's a change of colors on the windows, the doors, the cornice. Really, really pleasing to the eye. Another stupa, this is probably a little more typical. This one's painted, and all of these things on these stupas had deep religious symbolism. The eyes representing wisdom. You see the ubiquitous Himalayan prayer flags there hanging from the edge of the roof. And they typically come in 5 colors that represent, if I can remember, earth, water, fire, sky, and air. They all have religious connotations, texts on them. And you see the woman over there on the far right dressed in traditional garb. I watched her, I think this is the same woman. I watched her walk around this long array of prayer wheels, probably at least 5 times, just spinning them as she went around. And there's sort of 2 types of people in these villages, and there are these traditional people that, from what I could tell, just kind of subsist on farming the terraces. They have faces that just look like they've had hard, difficult lives. And I would have loved to have made a photographic study just of their faces, but you sort of feel a little self-conscious taking photos of people. So I was able to get her in the picture while looking like I was pointing at the array of prayer wheels. And the other people are the people who run the lodges, the tea houses, the restaurants. And they're sort of 2 different, I guess, moods. The people who cater to the trekkers are very open and friendly and welcoming. And these villages are neither friendly nor unfriendly. They just sort of ignore you. They go about their business, and I kind of often wondered what they thought of us. Did it seem weird for people to be hiking in the mountains while, it's only in the last couple of centuries that people have gotten the luxury of being able to think of mountains as beautiful, grand places. In medieval times and beyond, mountains were generally thought of to be ugly places of hardship and obstruction. And I wonder if they still see them like that. Certainly our guide thought the mountains were beautiful and loved them. Here's a bigger than average village, I suppose, that we're coming into. And again, seeing those big imposing mountains as we get closer to them and higher up. Our guide would supply us with some snack food for the next day at the end of each supper. And he'd give us each a candy bar. And occasionally on the next day's walk, you'd be hit up by the village children, which were hard to refuse. So some days we went without candy bars, and these two kids are eating one of ours now. They almost look like they could be twins. Another stupa and mani wall as we head further into the mountains. And two villagers just enjoying their lunch at about that time of day. With their fields, they were growing beans and corn and everything you might expect. Excuse me?
Altitude.
The altitude here, I'm guessing we're working our way up to in the neighborhood of 11, 12,000 feet, something, maybe not quite that yet. Well, when everything has to be brought in by mule, I guess people get creative with their construction materials, but I thought this was an interesting use of corrugated siding. You see a temple up there on the hill. That's a brand new temple being built, and I'm not quite sure. There it is again, and a little bit closer at sunset. I'm not quite sure where how all the construction materials got up there, because some of these places are pretty elaborate. Helicopter would be the only other possibility, and that would be very, very expensive. So I'm just not sure. But we were always impressed by the painting, the gold leaf, the attention that went into these temples and other buildings, the incredible ornate stucco and plaster work, which you see there, not completely painted. Just exquisitely detailed, beautiful painting and relief. So to answer your question more accurately, Nina, I think this is probably getting around 14,000 feet. This is when you get up to a certain altitude, they want you to sort of stay there for a couple nights here and there to gradually acclimatize to the thinner air. So we stayed in this one lodge 2 nights and did a long day hike, climbing up into this beautiful open valley between high mountains. This is a yak skull. It almost killed me to leave that on the ground. One of my very few eccentricities is that I like to collect animal skulls, and I would have liked to have brought this back. They use yaks up in the high altitudes because they're a little hairier. I guess they do better with the cool air and the high altitude. You see cows down at lower altitudes. But anyway, I just love being in this open alpine valley surrounded by these beautiful snowy mountains. Mount Manaslu, which the trek is named after, is that sharp double peak on the right. There are a number of treks in Nepal, and we looked at several to decide which one to take. The most famous one, of course, is Everest Base Camp. Very, very popular, highly trafficked, pretty developed. The base camp itself, as you may know, is just a sea of hundreds of tents. And I didn't really want that experience. Another one is the Annapurna circuit, another well-known one. And Annapurna has sort of they built a road along the Annapurna circuit for part of that. Didn't really want to be walking on a road. So the Manaslu trek is relatively new, within the last 10 or 15 years, I think, and a little more remote, harder to get to, a little less trafficked. And it just worked out perfectly. I had never heard of it. Of course, Annapurna is a famous mountain for climbers. But Mount Manaslu is actually the 8th highest in the world, and it's another popular destination for climbers. I didn't really, I'd seen my nephew for usual Christmas, Thanksgiving gatherings, that sort of thing. Never really spent a lot of time with him, but it was a I think, a pleasure for both of us to get to know each other a little better and spend time together. At least it was for me. This is another stupa on the way to a monastery, which is our destination for the day. And that's one of several monks coming into the monastery. You see there on the right. And there are several more. I was really glad we did this trip in May. I think summer or fall, a lot of this new snow on the mountains would have been melted off maybe. And instead of snow, we'd have been seeing just bare granite, which to me wouldn't have been nearly as pretty and dramatic. And this is a little temple, many, many hundreds of years old. The blue roofed buildings on the left are the dorms for the monks. They don't live there, but they come up and stay for however long they want to be there, I guess. And then head back down to the village. So we're taking another route back to the village that we came from. Pretty steep route down, fairly treacherous. It was walking on a lot of rounded stones. It was somewhat like trying to stand up on ball bearings. We both fell once or twice. And I like this picture quite a lot because it shows so much. They're coming into another town where we again stayed 2 nights. You see 2 stupas there in the picture, pretty rare, fairly disheveled manti wall with a lot of tablets and a long, long row of prayer wheels, certainly the longest one we ever saw. And a village woman carrying a large basket full of something or other. So we stayed there for 2 nights, again, trying to acclimatize our lungs before the big climb over the pass at 17,000 feet. And on this day, we toured the grounds of a Buddhist monastery with lots of these wonderful old stone buildings, some old like these, and some new. And there again, showing it's wonderful use of colors that they were so creative with. I particularly like that building. Many, many temples, and then the very detailed, very ornate gold-leafed buildings of the new temple. And the incredibly lavish interior. I kept trying to imagine having the job of painting one of these places. This was a Buddhist monastery here. Yes, they were. So from the monastery, on the same day hike, we hiked into this big glacial lake. This milky turquoise color is typical of glaciated areas. You see it all through the Canadian Rockies. And the color of the water is due to the glaciers as they move down the mountains, just grind that rock into a fine talcum powder. It flows into the lakes and gets suspended. And when the sun goes through it, it just develops this beautiful, beautiful milky turquoise color. All of the white that you see in the foreground on that lake is not lakeshore or sand, it's floating ice. And there is our Daniel there sitting, our guide, Babu in blue. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that we had a porter. I'm a lifelong backpacker, and I was a little resistant to the idea of having a porter. You do have to carry your sleeping bag, your clothing for anywhere from 90 degrees probably to sub-freezing, all your toiletries, sandals, things like that. So it gets a bit heavy. And I just told Babu, we'll do that. We don't need a porter. And he said, well, you're an aged man. You should have a porter. So we had a porter and never regretted it for a minute. We did carry backpacks and carry some of our stuff because we felt somewhat guilty loading the porter, whose name was Syria, up completely. But this is interesting. This is how he carried this stuff. He had two big orange waterproof duffels that didn't have back straps, didn't have a waist belt. He carried it the old-fashioned way, like the French voyageurs used to do, with just a strap around the forehead. It's called a tump line. And that's the way he carried this for 110 miles. You would think that would be terrible for your neck vertebra over a while. I don't know what the incidence of back problems is amongst these guys, but that's how he wanted to do it. And a big sweeping view of the valley we're headed into, and another long Manny wall as we get higher and higher. We'd see people carrying very heavy loads, very big loads. I guess mules can't do it all. These guys were carrying sheets of rolled corrugated metal up the mountain for God knows how many miles. And even a woman here doing the same thing. One day we saw a group of guys as we were coming down off that pass. On the last day, we saw a group of guys carrying these big steel poles, 20 feet long. Each guy would have one pole. And they were taking a break around the bend. So just as an experiment, I picked up one side of one pole. And I could pick up one side, but the idea of carrying those poles up this snaking, winding, steep trail for miles and miles and miles, it was just incredible. Anyway, soon they'll have a road, and I guess that won't be an issue. And speaking of the road, you know, it seemed to us that to the extent that the economy of Nepal has to be to a great extent, a large extent, dependent on trekkers. It seems like they were sort of, maybe in part, shooting themselves in the foot by obliterating one of these treks. And certainly many of the businesses along in the villages are strictly devoted to catering to trekkers. So they'll be, in some of the villages will be entirely displaced and have to be relocated. Some of them will find a highway going right through them. And I didn't mention that the river that we walked along for so many miles is also slated to be dammed. So that will no longer be free flowing. Maybe the economic benefits will outweigh the negatives. And I guess we rich Americans who have paved over so much of our country and dammed so many of our rivers can't judge, but seemed kind of unfortunate. Climbing ever higher, at this point, we had to cross this very wide avalanche field, which gave us a little pause. I don't know when that came down, but you sure wouldn't want to be caught in one of these things. It probably, the trail, there was a path through it that people had worn. And I would say we probably walked through this thing for at least a couple hundred yards. And this is one of the more primitive, unimproved medieval sort of villages that we stayed in. Traditional stone buildings. You'd see yak dung plastered to the sides of the stone walls to dry out for later use as cooking fuel. They typically live in the second level of these structures and house their livestock when it gets really bad in the lower tier. But another great incongruity in this medieval of places, if you look hard enough, you'll see a satellite dish and a couple of solar panels. So it's an interesting meld of old and new. This is, I think, a little living quarters for the monks, or the monk, the main monk, or the whatever you call the the high priest of the temple, and beautifully weathered old door. And these are yaks just hanging out on the terrace immediately above our lodging. So I used to do these programs on a fairly regular basis back in the old days. I haven't done one in years, but I always like to talk a little bit about the geology. I think it was my exposure to all that bare rock in the West, and in particular the Utah canyons with the thousands of layers of different rocks, all laid down at different eras and different periods. It gave me a sense, an interest in big picture geology. But whenever I'm in a place like this with dramatic scenery, I always kind of want to know how it was created. So these are the biggest, tallest, youngest mountains on Earth. What are they doing here? How'd they get here? Would anybody like to know? I'm glad you asked that question. They're here because geologically speaking, India is not a part of Asia. Most of the world's 20 or so odd tectonic plates move around at about the speed your fingernails grow. Pretty plodding pace, but over millions of years, that can create a gulf like the Atlantic Ocean. But about 40 or 50 million years ago, India came zipping up from below the equator, the Southern Ocean, at a much faster rate than that. Faster than your fingernails, but certainly slower than your grass grows. But it came plowing into the underbelly of Asia. And when two continental plates collide, there's only one way to go for that material, and that's up. So all that rock, continental shelf material, and so on just gets crunched and folded and faulted and uplifted. And it's a remarkable fact that the very top of Mount Everest, at just under 28,000 feet, is composed of marine limestone. The very top of Mount Everest has the fossils of ocean creatures that lived millions and millions of years before these mountains were here. So amazing to think that a lot of this trek we were walking on old seabed that used to be the continental shelf of India or Asia. And if time machines existed and you could dial one back 300 million years or so, it wouldn't be necessary to fly around the world to see mountains like this. You could just go up to North Carolina. This is what the Appalachians looked like back then. Now they're just the eroded nubs of mountains that used to be every bit this high. And at the same time, 300 million or so years ago, and by the same token, if you wanted to visit Africa, it wouldn't be necessary to fly across the Atlantic. You could just walk east a short ways and you'd be there. So it was that collision that caused the Appalachians and raised up those mountains. Pretty amazing stuff, I think. Oops. Oh, there you go. This is the very last outpost that we stayed in. It's basically modified shipping containers, I think. Way above timberline. We've left the trees long behind. And it's pretty cold. We've gone from being hot and sweaty at the low elevations to cold and windswept. We didn't spend too much time outside here because it was windy. It was very cold. And stayed there overnight before making the big push to get over the pass the next day. And that day was a pretty long day. At high altitude, we had 4 or 5 hours of climbing to do. So we got up at 3:30 in the morning, had a quick breakfast, headed out before dawn using headlamps to get up and over this pass into the next village. And it was just, we'd been worried the whole time that the snow might be too thick to get through up here. Every evening, afternoon, it would cloud over, fog over. So we never saw the stars. And kind of also thinking it might be really cloudy up there, we wouldn't be able to see anything. It might be incredibly windswept, it might be bitter cold. And here we were on this beautiful, clear, calm day, cold, but not uncomfortably cold. And it was just exquisite. One of the pitfalls of being in a country, I wouldn't say it's third world, but it's definitely a poorer country. As many of you know who've traveled through South America and places like that, you have to be very careful with food and water. And we were very careful. We would treat our water, not eat salads, don't use ice. You don't want to catch any intestinal sort of disease or have problems, but there's no health inspectors up there inspecting the food in the restaurant. So Daniel came down with something unpleasant and unfortunately had it as we went over this pass, some intestinal distress. It's always frustrating to me taking pictures of mountains, particularly big dramatic mountains like this, because to fit them in, you're forced to use a wide angle lens. And the wide angle lens inevitably shrinks the mountains down fairly dramatically. So there was never a case when I would take a picture and compare it to reality that I thought came anywhere close to what I was seeing. It's only when I get back home and kind of forget how it really looked, they start to look, yeah, they're okay. If you really wanted to get a more accurate picture of how this looked, you could multiply the scale and the size of the mountains by maybe a factor of 3, and that would be more accurate. But it's remarkable to be up at nearly 17,000 feet, higher than anything I believe in the lower 48. And at that altitude, still be seeing these Rocky Mountain size peaks rise all around you to much higher elevations. This was just under 17,000 feet. Our guide was very diligent and just insisting that we stop periodically and take breaks and make sure we weren't getting, at these altitudes, people can get severe headaches and even something like pulmonary edema, which you don't want to get. But we actually did pretty well. There is high altitude medication that we had, pills. We were both doing okay at 14,000, 15,000. And I've spent a lot of time in the Rockies and the Sierra and places like that, never had too much problem. And I kind of didn't want to take those things just to experiment and see how I do, but you don't want to get up there and get sick. So we took them at about 15,000 at one of those overnight stays while we were acclimatizing, and maybe they helped. I don't know. We did notice our fingers tingling, and I guess they have the effect of opening up your capillaries all through your body. And here we are at Larky Pass at 5,106 meters. Somebody can do the math, but I think that's just below 17,000 feet. I've had the great privilege of traveling all through the West and over my adult life and seeing just some incredibly beautiful landscapes, the French Alps, and I had an emotional reaction up there unlike any that I've ever had. And I've been thinking in Nepal for years. I've been specifically anticipating this trip for months. We've been climbing up to get to this pass, which I figured would probably be the highlight of the trip, for days. And I got up there and I was just I was just overcome with a sense of awe at the incredible natural beauty and privilege for being there, and gratitude for being still able to do this kind of thing at my ever advancing age. And I couldn't speak for several minutes because I couldn't trust my voice not to crack. I was just really kind of moved by that. We thought, as one normally would, that once you got to the top, the hard part's over. It's all downhill from there, and it'll be an easy cruise down to the village below. But what the downhill side of this pass, the snow was deeper, for one thing. I guess it was probably the north-facing slope. Our outfitter did bring these fairly small crampon spikes for our shoes. But at times you were walking on this narrow trail with a very steep cross slope, downslope, such that if you slipped, and if crampons are good at grabbing onto ice, but in snow this deep, they just kind of mush down and slide. And I found that descent to be semi-terrifying. Your foot would go down and slip, and if you went off that trail, you'd slide probably a good 200 feet before you hit bottom. Daniel, in fact, did slide at one point, goes careening down on his stomach, and outfitter caught him. He wasn't sliding in the worst direction, fortunately. Once I stepped through some void in the snow and buried my leg up to my upper thigh. So I was never more glad to get back down to firm ground, which we are here. I think it took probably 4 hours to get to the top, maybe another 2 or 3 to get down. But here we are on firm ground, looking into a formerly glaciated valley. You see that long glacial moraine on the right. That's the material that's just plowed out by the glaciers that moves down the slope. And these glaciated valleys are really becoming a problem in the Himalayas, because what often happens, it's not happening in this particular one, but the lateral moraines and the terminal moraines at the end create perfect dams. And as that glacier melts back, these areas can fill with water and become large lakes. And eventually, as the glacier melts further, the lakes get higher, and that terminal moraine can be overtopped or break through, resulting in a massive flood downstream. So a lot of these villages are at risk, and in a very big way. One of the ways, I suppose, that climate change can directly kill people. We got to the village about 3:30, so 11 hours after we left the previous place to get over the pass. That was our last village before heading out. And the last day's hike out was one of the best. We just descended through these areas of, I think, 4 different forest types, beautiful, huge spruce fir forest, the blooming rhododendron trees, pines, branching birches and open glades, looking down into just incredibly deep valleys and up at these incredible peaks. And this picture won't be of any visual interest to anybody, but I included it as a prompt for myself just to talk about people on the trek. One of the great unanticipated, on my part, pleasures of this trip was the people you meet. Trips like this are kind of a filter for humanity, aren't they? And we just met so many young people that were in this case, German couple, Eric and Louisa, that were traveling around the world. They had been to all through Vietnam and Thailand and New Zealand. They were heading on to go scuba diving with whale sharks off of Indonesia and diving World War II wrecks off of South Pacific Islands. But we met, we'd have conversation. I remember a conversation over dinner with these three recent high school graduates from England that deeply in depth about American politics. And they knew how our system worked, the three branches of government, all the main players, much more than the average American would know. We met a Belgian woman who was traveling around the world solo, going to places like Uzbekistan on her own. So it inevitably happens whenever I'm doing a trip like this or backpacking in the West and feeling pretty good about what I'm doing, that I meet somebody else who's putting me completely to shame. But anyway, this couple, Eric and Louisa, even though you're generally not walking with people on the trek during the day, people are kind of moving at similar paces. You end up frequently at same time for lunch, same time for staying in the lodge. And so you see people over and over again. And we struck up a pretty good friendship with them. After we left the trek, we went to the town of Pokhara for a couple of days. They happened to be there, so we got together for dinner. They happened to be in Kathmandu when we returned, so we got together there. And I'm still keeping up with them. So just a real pleasure to meet those people. So after Pokhara, where I took that one and only picture there, we flew to another national park, Bardia. Bardia is more remote, less visited, bigger than the previous one, Chitwan. And we stayed there for 3 or 4 days. Bardia has a population of 300 tigers now. And word was if you stayed there for 3 or 4 days, you had about a 50-50 chance of maybe spotting a tiger. So we had our hopes up, not particularly high expectations. We took a raft trip down this river one day. We did an all-day hike through the jungle on another day. This is one of many, many termite mounds that you see on the grounds. And this is literally the tip of an iceberg. 90% of these colonies is below ground. So that's just the top. They're composed of billions and billions of organisms. And they're scattered all through the jungle. Pretty amazing. So this is our all-day walk through the jungle. I had some reservations about hiking through the jungle in tiger habitat. And wading across what were probably crocodile-infested waters. But you, I guess, have to trust your guides. So we did. Our guide, Babu, was a Himalayan guide, but he wasn't well-versed in these parks, so he hired a separate park guide for us. And so on this particular walk, we did in fact see a tiger track, which is, I should have had something down there for comparison, but tiger tracks are very big. That was a very fresh one. So we knew they were around. And let's see. Yeah, there we are on a lunch break with a big, vast river behind us. They fed us really, really well in this whole month. I'm a guy who finds it almost impossible to gain weight. I inevitably come back from most vacations, particularly the wilderness ones out west, having lost a few pounds. And it generally takes me months to gain those back. But for once in my life, I actually came back a few pounds heavier, despite all of the calorie expenditure. So on the next day, well, speaking of tigers, we didn't see a tiger on that day. We did see the tracks, but The guide seemed a lot more concerned with elephants. There are plenty of wild elephants that live in both of these parks. And I guess it was in the morning, we saw a lone bull elephant grazing off in a pasture, not a pasture, but a glade. And we were kind of watching him, and the guide said, okay, if this elephant starts coming this way, turn and run as fast as you can. And didn't find that terribly reassuring. And for the end of the day, there, when we were just really hot and tired and getting pretty close to where we needed to get back before dark, there was another elephant just off the trail, and we tried to wait him out, but he just wasn't moving. And so the guide took us bushwhacking off the trail through all of this dense underbrush to bypass this elephant. And I remember thinking, I don't know about elephants, but I know there are cobras out here that will, if one bites you, you have maybe 10 minutes to live. So I asked him later if he ever worried about cobras, and he said, nah. So the next day we took a Jeep safari to take in some highlights of the park that are not easily reachable on foot. And as we passed another Jeep going the other way, and they stopped and they said, if you go down this dip and you come back up on this rise and you stop there and you look off into the woods, there's a tiger under a tree. And so we did, and sure enough, there's a tiger under a tree about maybe 30 yards away. Just tremendously exciting to see that. Not too many people get to see a wild tiger. We later saw another tiger just basking in a shallow part of the river, hundreds of yards away, but clearly a tiger. Villagers live outside of this park, and I later learned that I think as many as 16 villagers over the last decade or two had lost their lives to tigers. They'd be working in the fields alone, and tiger will just come up and take them. So had I known that, I might have just stayed in the lodge and read a book. I don't know. But a lot of the buildings in these traditional villages are built with this system of wood poles set in the ground, woven thatch wood interweaving between them, and then plastered by mud. And most of them are fairly small little huts, 1 or 2 room houses. But we were given a tour of this particular place. This was a very large extended family. 60 people lived in that building that you see behind those 2 women. And the reason they all lived there is because the family patriarch has issued an edict that if any of his offspring or their spouses or their children or their probably cousins or aunts or whoever, if any of them leave, they will be cut out of his inheritance. So they're all kind of captive, and they live in this one house, very, very tight quarters, one whole outhouse serving the whole group of 60. And inside, they just live in these little, basically cubicles behind curtain walls. Floor space is at such a premium that they hang a lot of their staples from the ceiling. And every month, one couple has the duty for the entire month of preparing all the food for the whole rest of the group, the other 58. So they live in the kitchen. They, I guess they labor all day preparing 3 meals. Oh, yes, the round things, let's see. I think those were just mud that was drying enough to plaster on the walls, and kind of, they have to renew these things once in a while. And this, as I said, is an unusually large dwelling, but most of the dwellings are pretty small. And occasionally a bull elephant will come out of the jungle and just rip one of these dwellings to shreds for unknown reasons. So they've taken where they have the wherewithal to building them out of concrete blocks. But that's an expense a lot of these people can't afford. So you still see a lot of these mud huts. And then back to Kathmandu. Kathmandu is a city of about a little over 1.5 million people. Pretty large city, but there are 3 different very historic medieval sections of town. And we took, on our last day there, we took a wonderful tour of these old sections of town with these great old temples and palaces. As I understand it, Nepal kind of grew out of these 3 different sort of kingdoms or fiefdoms, each occupied by a different ruler, and gradually just grew into a city from there. There was, because that India-Asia collision that I mentioned earlier, I was talking about geology, is actually still occurring. It's still underway. The Himalayas are still rising. And so once in a while you get a bad earthquake. And you may have seen in the news, I just had one a few weeks ago. But they had a particularly bad one in 2015. It's actually the subject of a very good 3-part Netflix series that you might be interested in watching. It's very compelling, called Aftershock, which sent an enormous avalanche into Everest Base Camp and wiped out lots of tents, killed a lot of people, flattened a lot of buildings in Kathmandu, including some of these temples. That temple you see right in the middle was flattened. But they've done a wonderful job of restoring these places, rebuilding them such that you just can't tell. To the right of that temple, back in the background, you see some diagonal wood cross bracing, and that's shoring up some of those walls that were damaged in that 2015 earthquake that they haven't quite gotten around to rebuilding yet. Just temples of all descriptions and types, very diverse. This is another very, very large stupa. It was just a religious shrine. And even these big ones like this are not buildings that you can go into. They're just exterior structures that are, I guess, monuments to the Hindu and Buddhist religions. So there's no interior to this, but it's sort of an octagonal structure ringed with these wonderful old, almost colonial-looking buildings. Behind those yellow curtains are prayer wheels that ring the entire perimeter of the stupa walls, and just great old buildings with shops of every description. In Kathmandu, not maybe so much here, but in Kathmandu, about every 3rd store is a trekking store, and they all sell counterfeit, imitation North Face and Keen and Patagonia stuff. It actually looks pretty good. You can I bought a nice vest for like $16, and but none of it's real. It looked like some sort of a outside opera house or something. I don't know what it was, but just lots of wonderful ornate buildings. This is you see just in a very sliver of the bottom, a river, very small river that was pretty obviously polluted and fairly trashy. Well, what's burning here is a funeral pyre. There were probably 5 or 6 of these cremations going on. This is a large Hindu complex. And I think in a city of 1.5 million, they probably go on 24 hours a day. And they're from the terrace steps above the river, looking at the cremation. And this is the King's Palace, which was filled with all these wonderful three-dimensional wood carvings. And it was great just to see, these places weren't crowded, but it was great just to see the locals just hanging out like a day in the park on all of these varied temples, and some of them still scaffolded, some of them still under restoration from that earthquake. But most looking pretty good. Then we went to a place called the Monkey Palace, which was a really large complex on a hill way above Kathmandu, overlooking Kathmandu. And it's called the Monkey Palace because there are monkeys all over the place. It just kind of run wild. They, I guess maybe people occasionally feed them, but one of the quirky things about Kathmandu was we were always just enthralled about their power poles. Their power poles, we kept trying to take the ideal picture of power pole because they all look like that one on the left. And at least once a day while we were there, the power would go out. And maybe this is why. But I don't know how they ever sorted out which wire was the problem. But the other quirky thing about Kathmandu is the traffic. The traffic is some of the streets are very narrow. They drive on the left side of the road, I guess, because of proximity to England, to India, which was an English colony, and that alone is confusing enough when you're a pedestrian. But some of the roads were 4-6 lanes wide, and probably half the vehicles on the roads are scooters and motorcycles. And in several days of riding around Kathmandu, being taken to one place or another, we never saw a single traffic light. Somehow they just work it out. We didn't really see a traffic jam anywhere, but you'd see people pulling out into 6 lanes of traffic trying to make a left turn, and they just sort of do it. And you'd see scooters coming in your direction with a bus right there, thinking this can't possibly end well. And somehow they just kind of, a path opens up between you and the bus, and they go between the bus. And just amazing. I swore that when I got back to Charleston, I would never, ever again complain about Charleston traffic. That only lasted about a week and a half, but that's longer than I usually go. So Daniel and I wanted to go paragliding. I had done that last year in France, in the French Alps, and just found it great fun. And you'd see these little storefronts of outfitters and offered paragliding. As it happened, we never got around to doing that, but they paragliding and bungee jumping. And we both had the conversation. We both really wanted to do paragliding, but we both agreed we would never, ever do bungee jumping. We just couldn't take that 15 seconds or however much of terror falling toward the ground. Wouldn't do that for any amount of money. At one point on this last day, riding in the cab across Kathmandu, I asked Daniel, so if you had the choice of bungee jumping off a bridge or renting a car and driving it across Kathmandu, which would you take? And he said, oh, I take the bungee jump. Yeah, me too. So yeah, I'd say we had, on this entire month, we had 5 or 6 near-death experiences, and none of them involved cobras or elephants or falling off a snowy mountain. It was all while in a taxi cab in Kathmandu. So that was the end of Kathmandu. We flew out the next day to come home, and one last unanticipated adventure. We had a long afternoon layover in the Qataran city of Doha, which is just the most immaculately clean, modern place I have ever seen and could imagine. It's amazing what a little oil money will do. But just walking off the plane into the airport, it was just gleaming, not a smudge anywhere. The taxi cabs all lined up outside were all this beautiful, identical shade of aquamarine. The tires were clean. We walked down this highway for a long way. There wasn't a single spot of gum on the sidewalk, not a little shred of paper. This building here was the new Museum of Islamic Art. It's one of the most remarkable buildings I've ever seen. My profession was in the architectural and construction trades, and I just could not imagine how somebody could design something like this and convey it in a set of architectural drawings. Would have loved to have gone in there. We actually talked about changing our ticket to fly home 2 days late, but Daniel had to get back to work. So that's the also new Museum of Islamic. Well, actually, I think the last was history. This is art, Islamic art. And you see that ultra-modern skyline of the city in the background. And there at dusk from our restaurant window, even the pedestrian underpass, which you see there on the right in the lower picture, which any other place in the world would be this urine-smelling, dank, dirty, filthy place, had little terrazzo stone murals lining the entire wall, chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, gleaming terrazzo floors. Just an amazing place. Probably new mosque there, lit up in yellow on the left, and a vast market area on the right that I think you could just get lost for days in. Went on and on. Any possible thing you could need would be in that market. And but ironically, even in this ultra-modern, ultra-clean city, I would say probably a third of the women that we saw in this market were wearing burqas. So a curious mix of modern and medieval. But after dark, you saw just lots of people out in the parks, going for strolls, fishing. Not what I typically picture in an Arab country, but just a pretty remarkable place. And then the long, grueling flight home the next day, 15 some odd hours. Don't recommend it if you don't have to. But that was basically the trip. If anybody has any questions or anything, I'll be happy to answer them. But
wow, Bill, that was great. Thank you. So yeah, there are some questions in the chat. So I do want to encourage people in the audience as well. So I'll start with the chat. So you remember when you were talking about the terraces where people were growing items?
yes.
Were any of the plants they were growing, were they rice at all ever?
No, I never saw any rice. I don't think they really had any way to irrigate the rice from way up there that would have worked very well, the river being way below. So no, mostly what we saw were just beans, corn, things like that. Speaking of that river, another little interesting tidbit. I got curious one day and I asked, well, when you flush the toilet, where does it go? And the answer was just like it was a dumb question. Well, it goes into the river. So there's no treatment or anything like that. It just all flushes into the river. So once that becomes a lake, it's not a place I'd ever want to swim for sure.
Wow. Okay. Another question from online is, were there any distinctive scents or odors?
Well, I'm a bad person to ask because I have a very, very weak sense of smell. I would say none that I am aware of. I know Daniel didn't mention anything, so I'd say probably not. Yeah.
Okay. And with the suspension bridges that you were on, I guess most of them were built with steel cables today.
Yeah, they were pretty substantial bridges. They had steel cables at the railings and also underneath steel slats. So you know, I never felt particularly at risk crossing those bridges. It wouldn't be a place for somebody with a strong fear of heights, I don't suppose. And it is mildly unnerving when they start bouncing up and down when other people are walking on them, but I never really felt uncomfortable on them.
Do you think that they crossed the river that way, you know, for millennia and before steel cables were?
Yeah, I think so, because the trail crosses the river, I think, just because maybe the topography is such that it gets easier on one side than the other to make a path. And you know, probably back in the day, those cables were made out of rope and things like that, and wood.
Besides the metal roofs, did you see tile roofs, slate tiles?
Tile roofs? Did you say roofs?
Yeah, roofs like slate tiles.
Yeah, there were plenty of slate roofs in the older buildings. I think they're gradually being supplanted with metal, but there was at least one picture there. I think when I was talking about that primitive village, that you saw a lot of slate roofs. They're generally pretty irregular stone, just placed as it comes.
And the road that they're building, did you ever find out, is it going to be a Chinese built road or a Nepal built road, or are they both funding it?
That's a good question, Christine. I don't know who's building it. I just know it's built to connect China with Nepal. And I guess at one point, I didn't mention this, but I think at one point in the Manitou trek is sort of the map is sort of like an inverted fishhook or J. So when you're going over that pass, Larky Pass, you're kind of at the apex of the J and you don't have too much further to go. But at that point, you're, I think, about 20 miles from Tibet. So we weren't too far. And then by contrast, in Bardia National Park, we're pretty close to the Indian border on the south. So covered a lot of ground.
So one person was asking about your camera because they loved your pictures. So can you talk about what you used to take pictures?
You know, my old SLR camera broke years ago, digital, and I bought a new one and took it on one trip along with my then new smartphone and took some phone pictures and some camera pictures. And I found that the phone pictures were just as good, if not better. And I've since bought a Samsung Galaxy, which are famous for being great picture taking devices. And so that's all I use, is just a Samsung phone.
That's fabulous.
And I was very impressed with the camera. And with the last phone I had, I generally had to do a good bit of editing to get the color right and the exposure right. With this new Samsung, I had to do very little of that.
Well, you had some great weather to help you.
I did, yes, and great scenery.
So what do they typically eat there? And do they eat the yaks?
They do eat the yaks, and I think we had the option a couple times of getting yak burgers. I'm predominantly a vegetarian. I'll eat a fish or a shrimp once in a while or a piece of chicken, but I'm not too inclined to eat beef. And so the diet generally consists of somewhat a mix of Indian, Pakistani type of food, dals, various dals and pastas and samosas and things like that. It was very good food. It was very filling food, but somehow the menu in every village you went to, even though it was printed differently, it had different graphics. You kept having the same choice of food. And after 8 or 10 days of that, it began to get pretty monotonous. And once we got back to Kathmandu for the last time, I think we were there for 3 nights. We found a pizza parlor and we went there 3 nights in a row. So,
After having traveled with you, Bill, I don't doubt that for a minute.
yes.
So how do they heat their homes?
As I mentioned, they did have some yak dung plastered on one of the buildings, or a couple of the buildings in that high, very primitive village. And so that would be part of it, at the higher elevations where there's no trees to burn, wood to burn. The solar panels aren't, well, they do have electricity. They might have space heaters, something like that. They might. I know none of our rudimentary dorm rooms, or whatever they call them, none of them had heating or any sort of anything like that. We basically slept on a single. These rooms consisted of just a small room. We were able to sleep in separate rooms because I'm a terrible sleeper. Wakes up at the drop of a hat. But we slept on these just single bunks with thin mattresses. If you're very, very lucky, you had a small table, but usually not. The walls were stud walls, generally with plywood or cheap siding on one of the 2 sides, and communal toilets. So very basic accommodations. I think we could have probably done better, but we were on a budget. And speaking of budgets, I might mention, I don't usually talk about trip costs, but if anybody's interested in doing this sort of thing and you're thinking, God, that must have cost a fortune, a guide for a month, a porter, all of this transportation and the in-country flight. Nepal is a remarkably cheap place, and all of that combined, almost all of our accommodations, including pretty nice hotels in Kathmandu and Pokhara, all the lodging on the track, the guide service, the separate guides that were hired for the national parks, the jeep safaris, the river rafting, the in-country flight, the bus trips, all of that combined for a month was $3,200 a piece. So, yeah. So I think we could have spent more and could have had maybe a little bit better accommodations, but we were happy. We weren't looking for too much. And yeah, so not prohibitively expensive by any means.
What's the deal? So how did you stay hydrated, Bill?
Well, just drank a lot of water. Yeah.
So when you were in those mountain passes and up there taking that trek, you were filtering all of your water, or was it bottled water?
I've taken to use in the last probably at least 10 years for backpacking purposes, something called a Sterapin. It's a little battery powered glass wand, basically, that emits about a minute's worth of ultraviolet light. You dip that in your water container and that ultraviolet just kills anything that's in there. And that's kind of what we used. Yeah. And Daniel had a filter, I think, and he filtered some of his, but
Okay.
But you know, no matter how careful you are, you still run the risk, as Daniel discovered. Of we, in fact, at one of those high elevation overnight, two overnight places, there were a couple of German guys that were so laid up and distressed with digestive ailments that they basically were bedridden for 2 days, and we saw one of these guys heading over the pass, having just recovered enough to do that, and he was just miserable.
So it was the luck of the draw that you didn't get sick, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, trying to be very careful, but you never know with those things.
Right. So with those prayer wheels, did they ever tell you about the prayer wheels? Like, when they're spinning it, how are they using it to pray? Does each
Well, yeah,
prayer wheel have a different meaning?
they do have meanings. Just about all of the paintings on the stupas and the those things and the temples. The guide went into a lot of intricate detail of all the religious symbolism and what it represented. And frankly, not being a religious person, I just sort of, a lot of that went over my head. So it didn't stick. So I'm afraid I can't answer that question.
Okay. One last question from online. Did you drink any butter tea?
No, the only tea I drink, and I drink it by the gallon, is good old Southern sweet iced tea. So there wasn't any of that to be had. So I mainly just drank water. I could occasionally flavor it with Crystal Light Mix, which is something pretty bad when you're drinking it at home, but somehow when you're on a trail, it's not bad. It's pretty good. As is a lot of food as well. So yeah, it's easy in these cold places, and I'm always told people on Western backpack trips that we've had, as you know, Christine, it's easy to be up there in these cold environments and not feel like you're sweating much and get dehydrated and develop pretty serious headaches. And so you really have to force yourself to drink a lot, even if you might not be thirsty. And we tried to do that.
Yeah, I know. So online, Bill, you may not be able to tell, but you just to let you know, Morgan McClure is on the line, and he is joining us from Nanchang, Sichuan, Southwest China. So thank you for joining in, Morgan, and it's nice to see you. So
Yes, hello, Morgan. Haven't seen you in years.
You can press stop share, and that might bring up the screen.
there he is.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. We're only 3-hour flight from Kathmandu here.
So some of the questions came from Morgan online.
Yeah, the butter tea. The butter tea is very rich, high calorie.
Did anyone else in the room have questions?
Yes, there were a couple.
Wanted to ask, I think in '91, did the Annapurna Circuit?
Yes.
The nickname for that was the Apple Pie Circuit.
Never heard that.
Because at all the guest house along the way, you get apple pie, pizza, hamburgers. What was the fare that you were able to get?
Well, we'd never had the option of any of that, actually. It was just this traditional dal, kind of a Indian type of Pakistani pastas and chicken dishes and things like that. I did get a cake one night, and that was, I happened to have a birthday. My 69th birthday happened on this trek, and we had eaten dinner, and I was about to get up and go back to the room, and the guide Babu said, no, we got something for you, and brought out this birthday cake and draped me with this white garland, and everybody in the room, they turned down the lights, and everybody in the room sang happy birthday to me. It was one of the most special birthdays I've ever had, and that cake was really, really good. So.
As good as the birthday in Bolivia?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
They built a new airport in Pokhara. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, I believe we did. Yeah, we had, as I remember, we had the option of flying from the trek, the end of the trek, wherever we were going to drive to Pokhara, it was gonna be this sort of all-day thing, and the roads and the buses are just torturous, and the idea of spending all day on a bus, just didn't want to do that, and somebody happened to mention, oh, you know, they have an airport, you can fly there in about 45 minutes, and we'll do that. So we paid a little extra for that flight, but very, very much worth it. Yeah, John?
Bill, I should mention that I think the group might be interested in the film Powascutsi by Jeffrey Riggio and Philip Glass, the music by Philip Glass, and it was produced by Francis Ford Coppola in 1989. And he was here, Philip Glass was here at the Dock Street Theater, and I met him. And he was on his first leg of these third world countries, and Nepal was one of them.
Is that right?
His first leg was the Sierra Madre open pit gold mine, which is in Brazil. And there, I just went on the YouTube to find the scenes that he made that Riggio made in Nepal, and that Philip Glass composed for that. And they have these prayer wheels that they spin, and the flags and the priests. Yeah. And many of the scenes that remind me of what you've shown, and they're spectacular. Yeah. The whole film is made in what's called 3/4 time. So it's like slow motion, you know, which is like the sense of the world in the third world where everything is slow.
I think I saw maybe his first film, Koyaanisqatsi or something like that. Have you seen that one? So I haven't seen that.
Koyaanisqatsi means world in collapse.
Yes.
Powascutsi means world in transition.
Okay.
Powascutsi is an uplifting and beautiful film, mostly about the beauty of nature. Koyaanisqatsi is about how we just ruin the world we live in.
Do you have any idea if that might be available on like Amazon or something?
It's available on pay $5, whatever, you can go and see the whole film.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see. I saw this section on Nepal just by typing into in YouTube, Powascutsi and Nepal.
Okay, very good.
At the high elevations, did you get any high altitude sickness or
No, I really didn't. I really didn't. You know, we were, of course, concerned about that possibility. You don't want to get up there. That I think we thought that was going to be the highlight of the trip, and it was. And didn't want to get up there and feel sick. We did get some sort of high altitude medication. I'm not sure what it was called, to take as sort of a preventative. And we both took that at around, as I remember, about 15,500 feet. And I was doing fine at that elevation, and I kind of sort of wanted to just not take it and see how I do, because I thought I'd probably do okay. But I didn't want to risk it. So so we did take that, and you know, I'm retired now. I'm pretty active. I'm stay pretty aerobically fit, doing a variety of things, and I think that helped. And it's somebody was asking me before the program if I felt the thin air, and you do feel it. But as I've said before on my Western mountain trips, you know, it's curious. You sort of, when you're trudging up a hill, you kind of expect to be out of breath. So where you kind of notice it is, or I notice it more, is not hiking, but just doing something like you're in bed and you're rolling over in your sleeping bag, or you're just breathing and you're thinking, why am I having to breathe so? Oh, I got to breathe heavy because there's not. And it's sort of, you have to remind yourself to do that. And that's kind of where I notice it. Elizabeth?
I think sometimes the altitude sickness can show up in digestive issues.
Yeah.
I was in Peru, and I knew to take it really easy in Cusco for a couple of days, but there were a couple of college kids there, and one of them, I told him, I warned him, but he decided to run 5 miles right after he got there.
Oh.
And he was really sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've had, I could think of 1 or 2 people that have been on my my Western Rocky Mountain Sierra Nevada trips and did it in pretty good shape, but they just, he's gotten up there and just had just splitting headache and had to go down. So you can improve your odds by being really fit, but you can't get any guarantees. You don't know until you get up there. And fortunately, Daniel did well as well, other than the digestive issues. So, yes.
I know it varied, but I was wondering about how far you walk each day and the distance for us.
I would say an average of, I think the entire trek lasted 12 or 13 days, as I remember. The trek was 110 miles total. We did have those 2 layover days where we weren't really making any progress on the trek, but we were out day hiking for probably 10 miles on those days. So over the total course of the trek, we may have done 130 miles in about as many days. So roughly about a 10-mile pace, not terribly grueling. Probably went further. I think the day of the pass, I believe we might have gone 14 or 15 miles that day. And you didn't have a choice because that was the distance between one village and the next. Yeah.
In footage, what were your maybe 3 toughest ascents in feet per day?
Well, I would say the day of getting over that pass was fairly consistently uphill and at times steep, and the thin air didn't help. And that was probably 4 or 5 hours of steady going uphill. But I really don't remember any days of just feeling like, oh, this is drudgery, or this is terrible, or which I've had a lot of days like that out west. In fact, as recently as September, but it really didn't seem all that terribly hard. So
One else was carrying your stuff.
yeah, that helped. Yeah.
Just kidding.
Not all the stuff, just most of the stuff.
I know. I'm just giving you a hard time.
Yeah.
Well, how about one more question if there is one in the room?
I think that's like it. Yeah.
All right. So Bill, I just want to say, there's a lot of people online that are saying, thank you. Your presentation was great. Pictures are fabulous. A lot of praise online here. And I am constantly in awe at how you are able to not just present pictures, but pull us into your trip and really bring us along with you on your journey. So you awe me in the way that you do that. And I know that you fill us all with a lot of gratitude for doing that. And we really appreciate it. And gosh, just another great trip. And thank you very much.
Thank you. It's very nice.
All right. So everyone, thank you for coming tonight. And Bill will be in the room for the rest of you, and hope to see everyone next month. And get your Oyster Roast tickets, and we'll see you soon. Good night.
Thank you from China.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Morgan.
Okay, take care.